Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cyber Risk Quantification Foundations, Part 2 of 3, deciding when to perform the quantitative risk analysis. When is the juice worth the squeeze? I'm Lynn Todoroff with HealthGuard, and it's my pleasure to be your moderator for today's session. First off, I'd like to invite you to join us on July 25th for our final learning event in the 3-part series, Cyber Risk Quantification Foundations, building a quantitative risk analysis program from the ground up. In this session, we'll provide some practical ideas and examples of how you can get started on building a cyber risk quantification program that delivers real business value. You can check this out on our website and sign up if you haven't already done so. I'll place a link in the Zoom chat for that. Before we get started, I want to let you know that today's learning event is being recorded. You'll receive an email with the link to the recording in a few days, and you can rewatch it or you can share it with colleagues. We're also going to send you a certificate of attendance and a link to the key resources that we discuss here today. We are here to educate and invite your comments and questions. So please take a second to locate the chat button on the Zoom controls. And if you think of a question for the speaker at any point, just type it in chat and we'll address all of the questions at the end. With that, I want to introduce our speaker. Apollonio Apps Garcia has over 20 years of experience in healthcare, cybersecurity, and risk management, including teaching and applying quantitative risk analysis methods to help hospital leaders improve risk reporting and decision-making. Apps is currently the founder and CEO of HealthGuard, a provider of enterprise and cyber risk management software and services for hospitals. He previously served as board president of the Society of Information Risk Analysts and contributed to open risk quantification standards and guidelines at the Open Group, which is an international open standards body. He's a decorated veteran of the U.S. Navy, a husband and father of 2. At this time, I'm going to hand over the reins. Apps, it's all yours.
Thanks, Lynn. Welcome, everyone. Looks like we have a small technical issue. And if the folks that are logged in or you show up as Aria Mains, if you could quickly go to the participants and rename yourself to your proper name, that would be very helpful, especially if we have any kind of Q&A. So you should be able to, I believe, click on the participants. That'll hit the pop-up window, and then again in the Zoom controls, just rename yourself to your name. That would be helpful. Thank you. So with that, today we're going to be talking about, obviously quantitative risk analysis. This is part 2 of the 3-part mini-series that we're doing to kick off our HIPAA Security 3.0 education series that we started last month. And if you missed part 1, that was just a foundational session on risk quantification, kind of the basics, terms, and concepts. So if you're interested, you definitely can go back and rewatch that recording. This session today is really, as the name implies, is understanding when we should do quantitative risk analysis. There's a lot of guidance, there's a lot of methodology that's been developed around doing quantitative analysis and doing risk analysis properly. But one of the things that's lacking is any kind of guidance on knowing when to actually do it. And one of the the godfathers of quant in the cyberspace, Jack Jones, I actually had this conversation with him not too long ago when I was working on this framework, and then said, Jack, have you seen anything out there that really is pointing people in the direction of, again, knowing when to pull the trigger on a quantitative analysis? He said, no, not to his knowledge. So if I'm not aware of it and Jack's not aware of it, then at least between the two of us and our travels, this should be a fairly novel framework that we're going to be sharing with you. So with that being said, I'll ask you a question. Currently in your organization or in your experience, how do you know when to do a risk analysis? how do you know when to do a quantitative risk analysis? But I would say just any risk analysis. What is it that actually in your organization, in your process, that tells you at this point, under these conditions, do a risk analysis? And I'm going to share some again, perspective and walk through that. And I'd be curious to know if the perspective we're bringing you today is different than your how you approach it, and if it's hopefully if it's going to be helpful to you. So as we go through today, we're going to be doing a quick review of risk management processes at large, because all of this is in the context of your enterprise or cyber risk management process. We're going to be introducing a framework for those that aren't familiar with it called the Cynefin framework, which is a Welsh word, which is why it's pronounced and spelled kind of differently. But it's, again, this is a very powerful framework that I first discovered through a Harvard Business Review article back in 2007. And so we'll be talking about that. And then ultimately, we're going to be answering this question, in Shakespeareese, to quantify or not to quantify. That is the question, right? We want to know when we should do a quantitative risk analysis. And then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. One of the things I want to remind us, though, and I'm shamelessly stealing this from Doug Hubbard, is this ersum sede approach or perspective, which is Latin for beat the bear. And one of the things that Doug reminds us when we're doing modeling is this old joke about the two hikers in the woods. And as they're walking through the woods, one hiker stops and this is an old joke, but it's appropriate. He stops and starts putting on his tennis shoes, and his buddy says, "Hey, why are you putting on your tennis shoes?" And he says, "Oh, there's bears in these woods." And the guy says, "Well, you're silly. You can't outrun a bear." He goes, "I don't need to outrun the bear. I just need to outrun you." And so, why this is appropriate here and in modeling in general is we have to remind ourselves that, we're not trying to be perfect. This framework, probably isn't going to be perfect either. We're just trying to improve upon what we're doing right now. We're trying to beat the bear. We're trying to beat our buddy, not the bear, right? We're just trying to improve upon the processes and approach we have right now. And if what I'm going to be showing you today is an improvement, then I think we've succeeded. So with that, let's take a quick look at a risk management processes, and we won't spend too much time on this, but again, I think it's important to ground us on where this framework applies. For those of us that have worked in enterprise risk or risk management for any length of time, we've probably seen the ISO 31000 guidelines. We are big proponents of this, of ISO 31000. And as you may or may not know, there's really three components of ISO. There's the framework, there's the principles, and then there's the process, which is here on the screen. And as you look at the risk assessment process, there's really the three subcomponents of the assessment process, which is identification of risk, turning over the rocks and identifying where there's potential risk in the organization or its operations or its strategies. Then there's the analysis of the risk, which is to basically deconstruct the components of the risk, understand the relationship of the risk, and then to eventually be able to measure or estimate the risk in terms that can be used for decision making. And then there's the evaluation, which is comparing it, the risk itself to your risk criteria, and also determining what next steps need to be. So maybe you need more information, deeper analysis based on the type of risk, or maybe you can decide where to go next with it. And then down below the assessment is risk treatment. And foundationally, what this is suggesting is that we do assessment to make a risk treatment decision, right? And again, this is very foundational and probably a yawner to many folks, but ultimately, what we are trying to do with any kind of assessment or analysis really is to inform decisions, right? Make risk-informed decisions throughout the organization, small, big, strategic, operational, tactical, whatever the case may be. We want to understand the risk associated with the decision, as well as the upside, the purpose and value generation resulting from the decision, and again, make a risk-informed decision. So it is here at this analysis phase within the assessment process that we're really trying to focus on that question I started off with, which is, how do you know when to do a risk analysis? Is it every risk that you've identified? Well, I would suggest, and probably most of you know, it's impossible to do a thorough risk analysis on every risk issue that you identify. There are times, and this is really the purpose of this discussion today, is that not only does it not make sense financially or from a resource standpoint, there are times when you can't do risk analysis, and there's times when you shouldn't even try. And so this is where the Cynefin framework comes in that we'll be talking about. And for those of us that on the call that aren't quite familiar with the what we mean by what we mean by quantitative risk analysis, it's basically being able to express risk in quantities. Right? Whether you're using a stochastic model or some kind of mathematical model, or whether you are using just a mental model, at the end of the day, you should be expressing risk in some kind of loss value and some kind of probability, right? And on the screen here is a couple of examples of both graphical and tabular expressions of risk, quantitative expressions of risk that are actually it's the same data. It's just presented two different forms. So in this case, what we're saying is, we know that risk analysis takes time and energy and effort and resources. And in some cases, some risk analysis can be quite in depth and quite costly from a resource standpoint to perform. And we know this isn't a free activity. It's that there's cost associated with it. So again, how do we know when that juice is worth the squeeze? Again, I'm going to, for the folks that have joined a little later, I mentioned this earlier. If you are joined as REM mains, we had a slight technical issue with the registration. If you could go into the Zoom controls and rename yourself to your proper name, that'd be very helpful. Thank you. All right. So again, this is a quick overview, very cursory overview of the risk management process and kind of where this discussion fits. So now I want to talk about and spend some time on a intro to the Cynefin framework. And the Cynefin framework, again, I first discovered it in this Harvard Business Review article that I mentioned earlier, is a decision-making, or they call it a sense-making framework that really uses 5 domains. And the idea behind it is, when you're faced with an issue or a situation, you should be able to apply one of these 5 domains to that issue or to that situation. And what we are positing today is that this framework can, and I would suggest should, be applied to risk issues that come up in the organization. Again, any type of risk issue you should be thinking about and applying or identifying which of these 5 domains that the issue falls into, and we'll walk through these 5 and help you understand what they mean and give you some examples. So starting off down here in the lower right quadrant, the clear domain. So these are risks that are straightforward and easily identifiable, right? Solutions are well known, and this is the domain of best practice. Examples could be compliance with regulatory requirements. Another simple example would be, a decision on whether or not you should allow your child to play on the highway, right? To make that decision, or if you see your child walking onto the highway, you don't need to do a risk analysis to make a decision on, hey, should I allow that to happen? You know the consequences. You understand the risk very clearly of that decision or allowing that to happen. So this is there's situations where you can identify the domain. If it's in the clear domain, you take action. From a cyber standpoint, another example could easily be whether or not you need to patch a vulnerability on a internet facing system, right? Especially if it allows remote access. Those are situations where you really don't need to do a risk analysis. That, especially if it's the system has direct access into your network, or the system could potentially houses PHI or any kind of other sensitive information. Again, you know very clearly that if we don't do something about it, the risk and the consequences are clear. The focus here are standard operating procedures and policies, and ensuring they're diligently followed. So this is what we could call what used to, and this actually used to be called obvious. The domain used to be called obvious. They've renamed it to clear. Again, you know the potential impact of issues that fall into this domain. The next domain is complicated, and this is this domain is where the cause and effect relationship between the issue and the potential consequence may not be immediately obvious. And this is where we have the need for experts, domain experts. And this is the domain where analysis is actually useful and applicable. And I'll go ahead and give you the punchline to this whole thing. This is the only domain where we should be doing analysis. Right? So if it's clear, I'm going to suggest that most of the time we shouldn't be doing analysis. It's only when the issues or a situation is in the complicated domain where we should be actually doing risk analysis, where we can understand, where we can through analysis determine again the cause and effect of an event. Many cybersecurity issues fall into this, but again, it could be applied to any type of issue where again you can determine cause and effect. And so some of the questions that we could ask ourselves to determine if it's in this domain is expert knowledge or analysis required to understand the problem? Are there multiple problems or potential solutions that could be evaluated to solve the problem, to address the problem? And so doing analysis to look at the various options and the benefit and costs associated with those. And do we believe that, again, that cause and effect relationship can be understood through analysis? So again, this is the second domain, that the complicated domain. The third domain is complex, right? This is a domain where you really cannot in advance determine the cause and effect relationship. It's only in through retrospection that we can then see, oh, this caused this led to this, which led to this, and this is how we came to this outcome. Again, it's only kind of that, what you could also call the Monday morning quarterback, that we can determine that there was a cause and effect relationship, but through analysis, we can't get there. And this is also, for those of us that are familiar with Agile, this is, where Agile applies, where the relationship and understanding of user requirements and customer requirements are not, it's impossible to predict what the result is going to be from some new product or service in the marketplace. You can also think a very silly example of this is, videos going viral. Everyone, all of the influencers on social media, they're trying to hack viral content, but they cannot tell you the formula for creating viral content. It's one of those things where it just happens. It's impossible to know in advance that if we build a video or some piece of content like this, it's going to get to 1 million or 5 million views. So again, this is the approach here is to experiment. And this is very agile in nature, where you have a hypothesis, you test it, you learn from the results, and then you iterate from there. Examples are, as it shows down below, is market trends and customer behaviors that are complex. They're impossible to predict in advance. But in hindsight, we can definitely identify cause and effect relationships. The fourth domain is the chaotic domain. So in the chaotic domain, there is no clear relationship between cause and effect. So analysis, traditional analysis, is futile, right? In the chaotic domain, we just need to take action, and what we're trying to do when this happens is stabilize the situation. And examples of this, could be natural disasters, market crashes that weren't expected, and so then in these chaotic domains, we're just trying to stop the bleeding, as it were. And trying to move into the complex, and then from there move into complicated, and then from there move into clear. And that's the other thing that I didn't mention is overall the approach to Cynefin is we're trying to move, if you will, clockwise. If you're in the complex domain, the idea is to eventually move to complicated into clear, if possible. And likewise, if you're in the complicated domain, eventually the idea is to move into the clear domain. But to also understand that a lot of situations are dynamic, meaning that you may be in one domain, and at any point in time you could shift into another domain. And the other concern is to what is called the disorder domain, which is the fifth domain, which is situations where it's unclear which of the 4 domains you're in, right? So in this case, what you're trying to do is basically dissect the problem and then categorize it into the appropriate domain. And it's also, the reality that you in a situation, you may be in different parts of the situation may be existing in multiple domains at the same time. And you think about the recent pandemic we just had early on, in the first months of it, we were, bordering chaotic and complex, and even to some degree disorder, where, we didn't have data on how the virus was going to spread. We didn't have data on how lethal the virus was, right? And we didn't have data on how shutting down certain parts of the economy and was going to affect us. So so there was a lot of different aspects to that situation that policymakers and decision makers were faced with. And again, in hindsight, parts of it you can say, oh yeah, they should have known, but which in some cases I say yes, but also there was a very real situation where they couldn't have known, and they were just reacting to the situation as it unfolded. So that is at a high level the Cynefin framework, and so what we're going to do moving forward is leverage the Cynefin framework to help us build a model around quantitative risk analysis. And so it should, I've alluded to and kind of previewed, I guess, a couple of ideas that we're going to want to apply. So this is it, right? And I'm a big believer in the Einstein philosophy of make things simpler, as simple as possible, but no simpler. And so, this is not necessarily an earth-shattering framework or an amazing visual, but I think it does the job as far as kind of helping frame the two parts that could help us decide whether or not we need to do a risk analysis. So on the y-axis are the two of the 5 Cynefin domains, and we didn't include the other 3 because, as we said, as I mentioned earlier, those domains, cannot be analyzed. So if you assign an issue to complex or chaos, then we know that we shouldn't be doing risk analysis. We know that risk analysis is futile. So the first step of the process of the framework is just to take the issue that you're faced with and determine which domain it's in. Are you in the clear domain with something that is obvious, the cause and effect, or are you in the complicated domain that subject matter expertise, the right subject matter expertise can help you do analysis? On the x-axis, we have risk treatment cost. And when we say cost, this could be, capital investment, this could be labor, this could be any resource allocation that, you would be applied to address the risk, to treat the risk, mitigate, et cetera. And so, what we're suggesting here is that if the risk treatment cost is low, if it's a relatively minor effort to address the issue, regardless if you're in complicated or clear, just fix the issue. Right? Going back to the notion of a internet exposed system or firewall that has a remote exploitable vulnerability. Again, you don't need to be a mathematician to know that if that firewall gets compromised, your network is, compromised. Just fix the issue. It's a relatively patching the firewall in theory should be a relatively low cost issue. It's when the treatment cost, the options that you're considering to address the risk, to mitigate the risk, or even transfer the risk, if those are high and it's complicated, then we want to do analysis. And again, when we're saying risk analysis, we're, understand that I mean proper risk analysis. I'm not saying just kind of necessarily, using mental models and saying that's a high and low and, or 1 in a 5 impact and likelihood. I'm talking thorough analysis. And in the clear and high domains, or I'm sorry, the clear and high, where it says maybe, this is really intended for those situations where, sometimes leadership, management, decision makers may want justification, right? They may not be domain experts, but they may want some justification for the request to allocate resources. If that, again, the resource allocation is high enough. So this is it. I mean, this is the really the simple as it gets in our minds, and the ta-da, right? This is the framework. So I'm gonna I'm going to ask the group here, since this is a Zoom meeting, you have the ability to come off mute. And, I'll ask the first question. Is there a different approach that you use to determine when you do risk analysis?
Hey, Apps, Justin here. I'm going to ask a question actually. So
Yeah.
I understood like the chaotic reason for kind of leaving off this map. Could you maybe go through the complex again? Complex versus complicated. That's the one where I was a little lost on why in complex are we saying, hey, the juice isn't worth the squeeze?
Well, the complex, the reason it's again, we're suggesting you don't do analysis, and it's not just we're not doing it. We're not suggesting it. Actually, the creator of Cynefin, David Snowden, because actually, let me take a quick step back. Cynefin wasn't built as a risk management framework. We're applying it to risk management. So it was really a decision-making, sense-making framework is what they call it. So, and it's of any situation where, again, we're just applying it. So, but even then is when there's no clear cause and effect relationship between something, then doing analysis is futile. It doesn't make any sense, right? So you think about it. So if we're analyzing risk, we're assuming that we can model relationships, right?
Right.
We're assuming that we can say, if I pull this knob or if this happens, then this is going to happen. Right. I mean, you're probably one of the most experienced analysts on the call, right? You're not in cyber, you're in obviously in financial risk, but that's how you model, right?
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. I think when I'm trying to, just trying to think through, and it's not that I necessarily disagree. I'm more just trying to think through the kind of thinking. So let's take like the risk of losing market share here example you have, which, right, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like there's this big kind of overlying question with cyber specifically, like when a cyber event occurs, how much of your customers walk on you as a result of that. And so because you have especially executives and business owners who are always concerned about like, well, you've quantified it to this level, but what about the reputational costs and the loss of customers that would perhaps suggest that an investment in a particular control or mitigation should be higher. And it's hard to do that. So often a lot of times you almost like leave it off the table. You're like, really, we really can't connect that relationship and model it. So is that kind of the thinking here that when you kind of think of this complex domain?
Yeah, I mean that cyber, there's that type of cyber application, but I mean, even if you think about, and I'm trying to, as you were talking, I was trying to come up with another similar example, and maybe let's take Blockbuster, right? At the time Netflix came out, right? One, we didn't have high speed bandwidth. Two, they were doing mail order DVD. Remember, early days of Netflix, there was no online streaming. There was none of that, right? So at the time when Blockbuster's leadership was looking at Netflix, and I haven't read the book on it, but I haven't read the Harvard Business case on it. But at the time, I could tell you that it would have been impossible for Blockbuster's leadership to predict what was going to happen.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Or maybe another example would be the C&O Canal on the Potomac and the B&O Railroad were started on the same day, both headed to Pittsburgh, right? And so at the time, canal boats, et cetera, were the construction and the performance of that transportation was far out exceeded what railroads were capable of. But over the time period, eventually in the end, the B&O Railroad got there 3 years before or something like that before the canal did, because the advancement of the technology was just so rapid. So that's kind of an example of maybe this complex domain. I think the only thing I would consider with these complex domains are there is some value in trying to do some of these things to see how much they react to certain things that are highly unknown. So like, for example, you know, in the case of Blockbuster or something like, here's the assumption that makes this highly unknown and or complex to figure out the ultimate outcome. If you change that assumption, if you actually pull that lever yourself, how does it affect your modeling? And so it's the only
Yes.
place where maybe like you might want to do a little bit of work in the complex domain. So yeah, just kind of a thought around that, but I get it, like especially in the context of cyber, it's about like I could see how looking more towards like your management of incident is more important in the complex and chaotic domain. So yeah,
Well,
so sorry,
and you nailed
don't
no.
mean to derail the conversation, but I was just want to kind of spend a moment talking about that.
Sorry for stepping in there. No, you're not derailing. You're enhancing it. I promise you. So let me go back to this, and because something you said there is you need to be clear on,
Mhm.
at least the position of complex. The we're not suggesting, and the model Cynefin framework isn't suggesting you do nothing. You
Yeah.
just kind of wait and see it happen. You're helpless. So just wait and see. No, in this
Mhm.
case, and this is again very agile, is they say probe, sense, respond,
Mhm.
right? So the probing is you trying some things and seeing, you have a hypothesis
Yeah.
and on how things are going to react, how the system is going to react. You try it out and then on a small scale, and then you see what happens, and then if it works, great.
Mhm.
And we use this all the time now when we're working with customers on implementing a risk management program, because we know in organizations what works at any given time, what works for one organization may not work in that another organization, because of culture, because of resources, because of all these different factors,
Mhm.
right? So,
Yeah.
so we actually say, okay, let's do some small experiments with customers to see, for a given customer, what is actually going to, what seeds do we throw down will actually germinate and start to grow.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And so again, it's important to again to be clear of what we are doing in the complex domain. But what they're suggesting though is and kind of said this a few times, is that actually trying to predict or analyze traditional analysis doesn't work here.
Got it. Got it. Okay. No, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's a good point though. Great question, Justin. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Uh, any other thoughts? And really, again, going back to the question is how do we currently make the decision? Because if there's another approach to determining when to do risk analysis, that could benefit the group, please throw it out there.
Hi, this is Andrew Shea. I'll jump in and full disclosure, I come from the quantitative risk analysis kind of mindset. So I fully just want to put that out there as my fully appreciated and understood personal bias in this area. Does not
Perfect.
make me right, just to be clear, but it makes me
Yeah.
biased that much. I'm almost 60, so I figured that part out of life at least. So one small victory a week, as I like to call it.
Love it.
So I get some of the foundational philosophy behind your thinking, but I just wanted to get I wanted to just throw a couple things out for conversation, just to kind of help me understand a little bit more about the underlying philosophy, right? Which if I could characterize as the following, and if I'm off base, please correct me, but fundamentally, right, there are these four quadrants, and some of these deserve different kinds of risk analysis treatment, so to speak, right? Based on the framework that you've got up on the screen right now, right? Based on
Mhm.
the complicated nature of it and the treatment cost, right? I mean, I look at that as a risk analysis kind of person. I'm like, okay, fundamentally, for me, the only difference between your model and mine is I've got risk treatment cost on one axis and I've got likelihood on the other, right? And so the difference is you're saying, let's not trying to evaluate likelihood. Let's try and look at the level of complexity. And that's kind of the difference from a philosophy perspective between kind of how I'm approaching it and how you're stating it. Is that fair? Does that make sense?
So does in your model, just so I understand,
Yeah.
is that to make a determination should you do risk analysis?
Yeah, very interesting question, right? There's I believe in kind of a two-step process. And again, personal belief, not fact at all.
Sure, sure.
Like there's a triage process, which is kind of how I'm evaluating part of what you're saying today so far, right? Like there's a triage process. Geez,
Yep.
how do I triage a risk that somebody hands me or that I identify to determine what the process is I'm going to use to execute my risk analysis? So get triage first, then, okay, what path am I going to use or which process am I going to use or set of processes am I going to use to do that analysis based on the initial triage that I do? So for me, your complicated, clear, right, low, low and high, right, are kind of the elements that you use to triage the risk and determine which path to go forward.
Yes, that's a great point because our old triage process,
Sure.
within, again, this is full disclosure, within HealthGuard, how we approached it, and within our software, was intended to do one thing, and that was set a priority. Just like in a medical setting, the triage process is to quickly determine what's the state of the patient and how quickly do we need to treat them. Right? Or is it fatal? So
Sure.
so we
Sure,
we
sure.
don't need to do anything. They're going to die. Is it something that it's critical or et cetera? So we same type of thing where the kind of our old approach was to simply say, how quickly do we need to start working on this issue? Not what do we need to do, just how quickly do we need to do it? With this
So
kind of new
triage
framework,
leading to prioritization, so to speak. Is that
yeah,
accurate? Right
that
on.
was how we did it before.
Yeah.
With this new framework, though, what we're suggesting is this should preempt even that prioritization process, because we the first thing we should be doing is assigning the domain or determining which domain the issue is in. Is it clear, complicated, complex, chaotic, etc.?
Sure.
And if we can't determine what kind of issue we're dealing with, what kind of situation we're dealing with, then we could be doing analysis when we don't need to. And as I started off, analysis is not free. There's a cost associated with analysis, and you could appreciate this since you're a quant guy, Andrew. So determine the question we're asking ourselves, or we're trying to suggest we should be asking ourselves, is should we be doing analysis at all? Is the situation analyzable, if there's such a word, right?
Yeah, right on. I'm with
Does that
you.
make sense?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. So that's it. So that's we're definitely on the same boat as far as the triage and kind of where this
Philosophy,
fits.
got it. Okay, right on.
Yeah.
So I think the difference I'll just throw out there, right, like
Sure.
is, look, risk quantification happens in a lot of different ways, just as, I mean, risk analysis, right? You have quantitative and qualitative, and as we're all painfully aware, there are multiple shades of gray within each one of those two categories of qualitative and quantitative analysis, right? And so applying which one is certainly the challenge. The comment that I would make again, overly noting my bias, right, is that one of the things that we run into, and I just thought I would just share this with the groups, it might be helpful just in the bigger picture, right, is like we do at the end of the day when we do a risk quantification analysis, to your point, you showed a nice loss exceedance curve earlier, right? So we have what's the likelihood of it occurring, here's the range of it occurring based on percentages, right? And then what's the financial impact? The interesting thing that we're running into, and I just throw this out there just kind of for philosophical purposes, is like now what we're being asked to do specifically, right, is to take those results, right, and put them into an ERM heat map, right? And it's a very interesting kind of dynamic, right, in that you have this financially quantified risk and now you put it into a heat map. And the reason I bring it up is then, right, the audit committee, for example, will select which of the items are of the highest priority and which ones to go out and try and prioritize based on where it is on the heat map. So I'm not trying to argue for a particular thing there. I just wanted to share that because I thought it's kind of an interesting element based on the overall discussion. So I'll just be quiet now. Thanks.
No, you don't have to be quiet, Andrew. That's good. Thanks for sharing and good question and points. And I'll say this. I'm not a adversary of heat maps. And this is now my personal preference and bias and perspective. I don't hate heat maps. I do hate risk matrices. Risk matrices should be abolished in all of business, in my opinion. But a heat map, from a visual standpoint, from a communication tool standpoint, is depending on how you do it, and we all know there's challenges in trying to provide a abundance of information into one picture. That's very, very, very hard to do, is to try to tell a whole story with just one or two numbers or one or two, small graphics. So, how you approach that, how you actually make that useful, and make sure that you're not losing fidelity in the message, et cetera. That's where the art of what we do comes in. So, but again, thanks, Andrew. Any other perspectives? Or again, ways that you approach the decision on when to do a risk analysis? All right. Well, I think that is it. Any other questions, Lynn, that have queued up? We'll actually give you some time back.
Just, one kind of general question for everyone on the call today, which, would be if people want to learn a little bit more about this framework, where can they go to get some additional information?
Oh, great question. So we're going to be publishing a paper on this hopefully by next week, where it's in the final review stage. And so the kind of model and approach will be published with details and questions you can ask to determine which domain you're in, some simple questions to help you, again, do that domain determination. So everyone on this call will get an email with links to that. You can go read, and then, if you have questions, follow up with us, and happy to keep the discussion going.
Abs, thanks a lot for taking us through this. It was greatly appreciated.
Sure. But before everyone leaves, though, Lynn, feedback.
Yes, on the screen in front of you is a QR code. We would really appreciate it if everyone would take a moment to either scan the QR code or go to the web address on the screen and provide some feedback on the presentation today. We're always striving to provide the best educational experience we can and do the best we can. So your feedback is extremely important to us. So if you could just take a moment to do that, that would be awesome. When you're in the survey, if you would just pick out today's date and then choose apps as your presenter and then the name of this webinar, deciding when to perform a quantitative risk analysis, when is the juice worth the squeeze. I'd also like to remind you that we have one final event coming up in this webinar series, which is building a quantitative risk analysis program from the ground up. We would like to have you join us for that one as well. You can reach out through email or LinkedIn or visit our website to register and learn more. I did put a link in the chat to the registration. You can just click directly through there. And, we really want to thank you for spending time with us today. We appreciate it. And we hope to see you next time.
And the feedback should only take 10 seconds to provide. There's one question you have to answer, and then there's like 3 or 4 optional questions you can answer if you want. So yeah, please take 30 seconds and respond. As Lynn said, it's very, very important to us to make sure we're delivering value to you. With that, thanks everyone.